All right. Hello, you guys. This is the first part of our lesson today on the Black Death and the bubonic plague that struck Europe in the 14th century. We're going to go ahead and get rolling right into this. While you watch this video on your Google Doc, there will be a section for you to take your own notes, and then I think there should be 2 to 3 questions that you also have to answer that will be answered in this video. So let's go ahead. We're going to break this down into 3 different parts. So our first part, what exactly was the Black Death? And then on top of that, what exactly was the bubonic plague, in case you don't know what was it. So the Black Death simply was just a global pandemic in the form of the bubonic plague that is going to strike not only Europe, but also Asia for a good chunk of the mid-1300s. And it's going to have devastating consequences, as we are going to see here. And fun fact, the bubonic plague still to date is the most devastating, quote-unquote, natural disaster in all of European history. Okay, so how exactly was this disease transmitted? All right, because we know, today in COVID, with the current pandemic that we are in, we know how it spreads. So this disease in particular was spread from rats. So what would happen? A rat would be carrying, the plague bacteria in their system. A flea would jump onto the rat, drink its blood, and in the process, it is intaking that bacteria. Now that bacteria, once it's inside the flea, it's going to multiply in the flea's abdomen. The flea jumps onto the human, bites the human, and in the process, the human is then also infected with the deadly bacteria. Okay, so that's how it's transmitted. So if you were to be bitten by a flea that had the bacteria, you would have a couple different symptoms. Usually it would start off with a fever, you'd have headache, chills, weakness, and eventually you would get swollen and painful lymph nodes, specifically, under the armpits area, and then sometimes you could get boils that would seep blood and pus. And basically, you guys, the short end of the stick is that over the next 5 years, the Black Death is going to kill more than 25 million people in Europe alone. I want you to think about that for a second. So, at this time period, the total European population was about 75 million. Okay. So that means that more than 1/3 of Europe's population died between 1347 and 1351. So I want you to think about this, in modern statistics. So if we're living in the United States, we have a population just over 300 million. Imagine if over the next 5 years, 100 million Americans died from a disease. Okay, and you can kind of see, just how devastating this epidemic was for the people living in Europe and also Asia during this time. All right, so what exactly caused the Black Death? Why was it able to wreak havoc the way that it did on Europe and Asia? Well, the first thing we have to know is, the Black Death was not like some new disease that just randomly popped up on the map, like, COVID. We're not really exactly sure where it originated from. Some scholars think that it might have originated in Asia over 2,000 years ago. There is some evidence that it was also already in Europe. But what we do know and you can see it here on this map, is that the number one thing that is going to spread this disease is trade. All right. So the first culprit is the Silk Road. Now the Silk Road here on this map, if I can find my mouse, Silk Road right here, it's going to connect China with the Middle East. Okay, and it's this road or network of roads right here. It's not a single road, it's a network of roads. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? Silk Road. We're increasing our trade with Asia. Now, the Crusades, which were the series of holy wars between the Christians and the Muslims to control the Holy Land, Jerusalem over here, that is going to cause Italian merchants to want to trade more with the Eastern world. All right, so you can kind of see where this is going. It's playing leapfrog, so to speak. So eventually, because of trade, we know that the disease, before it even reached Europe, we know that the disease was spreading through China, through India, Persia, Syria, and Egypt. And again, the number one culprit, yeah, it spread because of rats and fleas, but the number one reason it was able to spread so quickly was trade, specifically trading ships. You know, on your ships, you're going to have rats. Those rats will probably have fleas on them. That flea jumps onto a human. The human walks out of the ship. Okay, and you can kind of see how that disease is going to spread. Now, the first instance of really where historians say, you know, this is where the Black Death entered Europe was in 1347 on an island in Sicily, okay, which is down here in Italy, in Sicily. Now, what happened is 12 ships from the Black Sea, okay, so up here, they originated from over here, they docked at a Sicilian port. Most of the sailors that were on those ships were already dead, and the Sicilian authorities actually try to like quarantine these ships to, you know, not let the spread of the disease happen. But if they were able to contain the disease, we wouldn't be here today talking about it. Okay, and that is what's going to happen. The disease, and you can see here on this map, is really going to start in southern Europe and slowly work its way up through the trading networks that had been established within Europe. So, what were the major effects of this massive epidemic? Well, the first thing, you know, a lot of people are going to die. Simply put. The hardest hit areas in Europe, though, are going to be our crowded cities and villages. Because think about it. If people are living on top of one another, you're going to have a lot of filth. You're going to have a lot of garbage. If you know anything about rats, rats like garbage. And, yeah. And so we're going to see that, you know, 50 to 60% of English and specifically German villages are just going to disappear off the map, which is insane to think about. Again, think about if 50 to 60% of, let's just say, Indiana towns just disappeared, right? That's what it would be like. Insane. Our next major effect, you know, people, you know, they didn't know what was happening. You know, it's 1300s. They didn't have an understanding of modern medicine and things of that nature. And so many people blamed, you know, what was happening to Europe and Asia. Specifically in Europe, though, they blamed it as a punishment from God. Like, God is punishing me because of my sins, and I deserve this. And so what we're going to have rise in Europe is, and it's pictured here, they're known as flagellants. Now, what these people would do, they would go out in public, and they would do this publicly, like, you know, just on the corner or whatever, and they would have these whips, and they would whip themselves for their indiscretions against God. It was kind of like, hey, God, like, I know that I've sinned, and I'm taking the pain out on me. Please forgive me of my sins, and take away this plague. All right. Our next major effect, we're going to have a major rise of anti-Semitism. specifically anti-Jew. Okay, Jews in this time period were accused of poisoning town wells. All right, and because of that, many Jews were killed. Our last major effects. The first thing, we're going to have a decrease in trade. The second thing, labor prices are going to go up, and you can see this here on this chart. So we can see this blue graph is our estimated population. This is before the Black Death. We're going to go up, we're going to go up. Oh, we go down a little bit, stagnate, and then we have a major drop off, and this is the plague right here. And then at the same time, you can see carpenters' wages, about around the same time as, the population goes way down, the carpenter wages go way up. So the question you got to think to yourself is, well, why would that happen? And the really, simple way of putting it is, if there are less people to work, you, as someone who is still alive, can say, hey, you don't have anybody else to go to. You need to pay me more, or I'm not doing this for you. Okay. And then our last major effect is that food prices are going to fall. Okay. All right, guys, that was mini notes. We're clocking in about 11 and a half minutes. You can go ahead and go to your next part of today's lesson. If you have a question on something, you can send me an email, and I will get back to you ASAP.